Hello everyone, and welcome to a particularly more unique video of what I do for my Fall Guys today, as I take a look into my personal top 20 Fall Guys map makers. How did this video really came about was that I created a Q&A on my YouTube channel, and one person actually asked me about who is my current favorite Fall Guys map maker, and when I saw that question, I realized that it was very difficult for me to decide on just one particular Fall Guys map maker because of how things that different creators can come up with, all the different concepts and all the other potential effects that they can do on their maps, whether it be it aesthetics and then furthermore combining it with the gameplay. This makes it a lot more complicated to decide on who deserves the spot in my podium in Fall Guys map making. And after a long decision, I decided to answer that Q&A, but I will not reveal who is in my top 5 just yet, as whoever that I have answered in that top 5 may have changed since then, as well as now this video is more towards a top 20 overall in my list in Fall Guys. So even if you do see that you are much more on the lower end of my top 20, I do not think that you are a bad map maker at any point at all, but just that I feel that there are much more creators that are much more pleasing to me personally. Maybe in other people's eyes and their views, it would be that they are, or rather a correction is that that particular creator that I placed in the specific position is at the higher up of their own rankings, because to each their own opinion, and this list is really a subjective one and not an objective one, which is something I have to emphasize, because a lot of people, when they look at ranking lists, they keep thinking that this list, when it came out, it is a complete objective thinking where it is completely neutral point of view. That is not how rankings work. In rankings, there are always some favoritism, some biasness. There will always be that. And also, now that we have come into this point, I have to mention that if you do hear any statics at any point throughout this entire video, I do have to take an advanced step in apologizing, because my normal method of audio recording, which is through the headphones directly plugged into my laptop, isn't working as intended. So I have to switch into an alternative method where I'm using the controller. No, correction, my earphones connected to the controller in order to record, and it's producing an unknown static which I am not sure what is the ongoing reason for. But regardless, I did adjust the volume so that it will not cause too much of an issue. But that being said, I do want to get into this list as it is going to be a rather long one. One more thing to note is that I will not be specifically playing through any map of all the 20 creators, because for one, I may not have all the map codes saved, nor am I able to search it up, as the previous night I was really exhausted after what I've been doing in real life, and by the time I came back, it was already around 10 p.m. my time, which for some of you might be 10 a.m., for some of you might be midnight the next day. there are varying time zones that matters, and for me it just so happened to be 10 p.m. at night. So just sit back and look through everything, as whatever I speak of is probably the most important ones of how I rate people, as I do not really have time to really set it up to show you all the different maps, as I think not everyone will have a map that I can showcase at any point in time. But of course, as long as you are on my list, you definitely would have a map that I've seen for you to be on my list. But whether I am able to find a code for me to show others about it is a whole other story. Rest assured that regardless of what happens, I will get a map from that you have created, and I'll update it in the description. Now then, let us begin as I talk about all the 20 map makers in my list, and I'll just be doing some regular gameplay unless I do actually have a map that I want to showcase from that particular creator. With that, let us begin. So for my number 20 spot, I would say that the map maker that went to do the list would actually be Crispy Squid. Some of you would have known this creator as he has already been previously featured in Knockout, like Do Climb, and of course some other maps as well that is definitely worth noting of. Of course, when I say that certain people are in certain rankings, it just means that I always feel that there are always people that are better. Of course, despite me attempting to like look through a possible map as well, I am really unable to find a current, or through my limited time that I can spend through looking time at it, it was impossible for me to find a map that allows me to showcase it. But regardless, being in one of my spot actually is pretty impressive, as there are like hundreds of creators out there. So what makes me put Crispy Squid as my number 20 spot is that even though I would say from at least the maps that I have seen, there might not be too much of an aesthetic count or anything, but the gameplay that is created is definitely at a point where I can say that it has to be recognized by players regardless of how good you are at the game or how bad you are. And as a result, it does get into my top 20 list. Alright, ignoring the sudden cut in gameplay because I had it paused by recording, but regardless. So for those of you who are much more interested into a much more recent map that is currently in Knockout, you can take a look at Skydive. That is from Crispy Squid as well, because that map is one of the things where you can say that it makes it into Knockout because of the gameplay mechanic wise and much more other possible other factors. How obviously Mediatonic decides on their list, I will never understand how they decide on their list, but if it's worthy of knockout, and even me playing through it already, even I enjoyed it, it means that it's definitely up there. So with that, I do want to move on to my number 19 creator of the map. And before I move on to number 19, I will actually be running through why I feel that this creator deserves a spot in my ranking before I even reveal who it is. Because some creators in my list may not create maps as often, but when they create a map, there is that charm that some creators might not be able to replicate, even though they are good map makers or just spending lots of time in general. So when I played through one of this creator's maps, I've realized that the gameplay is also simple, but at the same time there are also aesthetics that allow for the map to be experienced and every other particular sections. Alright, for people who are much more aware of this particular map, Primos Promenade, the creator of this map is in my number 19 spot, and as you see in a particular second, the creator in that created this map is Red Goddess. And to provide a little bit of context to this map itself, before Showbucks were considered to be their final name, Primos was the first name that Mediatonic has given Primos, and Red Goddess has created a map based on this particular context around it, because Primos, and it's really an interesting thing that the developers have decided to name it. Of course, you may see that the aesthetic seems a little bit much more on the lower end compared to some of the higher map makers that I have done, but as I've really mentioned, that there are different factors as to why each creator is in my list. And for me, bringing back the nostalgia that is actually Primos, and how even though their design is rather similar to the current Showbox format, it just actually means that it is something worth to point out, and as a result, I just feel that there's a reason why it should be here at any point. So congratulations to Red Goddess on making it to my list as number 19. And we are going to move on to number 18 in just a very short moment. So for number 18, the creator has actually created lots of maps, but much more recently they did not make much more of a map really. And as you can see, the creator of this map is Renegade Kyra, or if I did pronounce the name wrongly, I do indeed apologize, because I have previously rated maps before, but I have decided to renounce the mentioning of who is the creator, because I do know that certain people do not want their names being pronounced wrongly. But this is a ranking of my top 24 best map makers, so I have to mention the map creator at some point. But regardless, what I do want to point out is that the aesthetics that this creator can come up with is completely on another bit of level, and really it just proves that how much time people have spent in making maps. And when you realize how they can spend so much time in creating maps, it is just made it on another level. So really, there are much more other maps that I can just completely show from this creator. But while I'm still on the topic of saying that whether people can make it onto my list or not, it is really much more of a simple thing than I would actually say. Because of how certain factors, when I combine them and look at it, it is why people are able to create such astounding maps. And the factors for each individual also differs. But regardless, I will now move on to number 17, as there is another map that would actually be presentable for this next particular creator on this list. Alright, so on to number 17 now. So at number 17, we do actually have the creator Bridgemaster01. So why did I put Bridge as one of the top 20 in my map makers list? It is more towards of the fact that how at times when you look at maps like these, as I'm sure that you guys have seen from the title, as we are loading in, being titled Frog Got Your Tongue. What happens with maps is that there is some map creators prefer to create maps based on a certain theming, and others just want to create maps to express their interest. So Bridge is one of those that will actually create maps based on much more towards a specific theme. I would not say that this is always the case, but when maps are created, there is a certain reasoning behind such a creation for the map. And I would say that the reason why it's so enjoyable is because maps also takes skill to actually just simply pull off, and it is not just something of a whim that you can just pull off and expect that you can combine it with aesthetics like how the frogs are in this map, and you eventually get to be that perfect in creating maps. That is not how the art of map making actually works. Some other maps that I would recommend you guys to try out when you actually do get the chance is, although you would need a party of two to actually play this map, some maps like Bridge Duster, if you have ever seen it, are also maps that I would say that focus on why certain creators are able to express their creativity. So touching much more on some creators is that when I get to the much more, like say perhaps the top 10 in the list or something, I will usually try and showcase a map of theirs unless the creator prominently focuses more on the part of survival maps, which I do have some of them that does that. So some other pointers to take note is that when creating maps, you do not need to really cater for all the different players, because in a game, what's most important is to be able to enjoy yourselves. And really, sometimes players, no matter how they play through maps, they'll always complain about such things. But regardless, I will move on to number 15 in my map creator list. Oops, apologies, number 16 in my map creator list, as that spot will actually go to Isla Revenant, as this is actually another creator that has been already been featured in Knockout, and the fact is that this creator, they are able to combine the aesthetics in their, not particularly into the gameplay, but then much more so that as they create the maps, they take a look at the aesthetics as well, and following which that they, as they design the map itself, you can really understand how much time they take to place certain elements of the map together, and that makes it much more complicated for your average map creator, perhaps like myself. And certainly when, as a result of all this, you would think that things come in at a different level entirely. Other than that, I really might not have too much to say about this map creator, as the maps from Knockout is all the maps that I usually get to see. But does it mean that they are bad map creators? Because by a long shot, this is definitely not the case. Because on how, when creators make it into Knockout, there is that certain way of map making that even Mediatonic approves of, even though it might be possible that the maps are rated by the community, which I rarely doubt this is the case, as I feel that they just take a look at which map has been played much more frequently, then they take a look at it themselves and whether they feel that it deserves a spot in the knockout rotation pool. Regardless, sometimes I would say that the decisions that Mediatonic themselves make is not at its best possible potential, but that doesn't actually stop players from creating maps that are worthy of other players to enjoy. And that is what I feel is most important when I was thinking through this list in my top 20. So now I will move on to number 15 in my list. And this is a name that I feel most of y'all would actually recognize. However, because of how I would say compared to some of the other names, at least particularly much more so in my top 10, the maps are a little bit paler in comparison to them. But again, I would want to emphasize that by no means do I believe that the creators ranked at this position or even below are any bad map creators. In fact, all 20 map creators in this list are actually excellent map creators. So at number 15, we do actually have Dr. Pepsi, who actually creates excellent, much more survival race maps, much more similar to like the Unity maps of Slime Climb, Slime Scraper, but with his own unique take on them. Due to how the maps are actually based on in survival, I cannot exactly show you the full gameplay of the map while navigating through two accounts or playing some different methods in order to show you the gameplay maps that Dr. Pepsi has created. So, despite all that I have said, did I always have enjoyed playing through the maps that Dr. Pepsi creates? Definitely so. And I just have to say that there are other creators that will position and let's move on to number 14 in this list. And this next creator, they might be a little bit less known to you people. So at number 14, we do have the creator Zeke. There are certain maps that Zeke has already created that are much more at a much more impressive pace, and I would say that he has actually so-called decided that he is a retired Fall Guys map creator. But however, this map that I want to mention out is that the map that I want to really mention out is Cat Playroom, because when I played through the map, I did actually realize that the gameplay is actually there. However, when I actually take a look at apart from the gameplay, which is the other part of the map actually contains the cats that Zeke has, and particularly it is a little bit much more on the higher end. What I mean, I do not just mean that how the map is overall, but when you realize that maps like these are created, it feels more of the thing that players want to create. Alright, so mentioning about all the different elements in the cat playroom map is something else that much others that will probably be interested in. I will try and get the code for this map ASAP for others to experience it. But no matter what you think of the map, there are things that people would like and dislike about it, and I implore anyone who watch this video to not just make their decisions on an impulse. So let's move on to number 13 in my list. In number 13 in my list, I do actually have .NET Gaming in my number 13. So much more recently that I have seen a map from .NET Gaming, as I will be quickly showing all of you for you guys to experience it, would be this particular map. Alright, so as a map that I want to show you guys, it is actually Trench Run. As I progress through the map, you guys would see how the overall aesthetics combined with perhaps a little bit more complicated gameplay would show why it is on my list. So do I particularly understand what the reference that this map is made of? The much more interesting part about the maps is this upcoming electrical part that I do want to actually mention, is that this actually makes use of a little bit of overlap, and I do not want to spend too much time looking at the electrical hazard because of how certain people that have health conditions, when they are looking at this, can be a little bit struggling with it. So overall, this map has the aesthetical elements in it. So obviously you guys will be able to see this particular drone, how it is specially designed in certain elements as such. All the rockets, all the ship controls, everything that is meant to be in, that would take lots of times to actually just particularly create it, is presently there. And as a result of this, which is why I have to say that this map makes it into my list entirely. So we will be moving on to number 12 in my list very shortly. And number 12 in my list is a creator that has created maps in the past as well, and some of it has been featured by Mediatonic, and alright, so for number 12 in my list, I do actually have Pepe in the map creator ranking. I would say that the maps that Pepe has created are both combined with aesthetics as well as gameplay, and really, as I ran through how others create maps as well, I would say that there are things that I would rate Pepe's maps a little lower, but as we get into my actual map rating series, which I will resume quite soon, I will go into much more details on why certain maps are lower compared to other maps. So certain maps that I would recommend all of you to particularly note would be the map Dusthaven and some other maps, but it has been said that some maps of his has been ruined by the new physics updates and much of other factors, even like the small space camera adjustments and all other different factors, which would lead for a much more negative experience. But these changes are not part of the creator's fault but of the game's, because you cannot expect any creator to change their map just because of a simple update, and at certain times the maps that would require changing might require a complete overhaul, and this can take days to even rectify a simple mistake. But regardless, I will now quickly move on to number 11. So at number 11, we have the map creator of Rolling Rift, and some of you might not recognize the username, and if you actually are aware of their YouTube, the map creator is actually ABC129. And when you look through the maps alone, you will notice that this map is much more similar to the knockout map in, I believe, the first ever rotation, and that is actually Rolling Ruins. However, this map obviously is called Rolling Rift, and this map is, I believe, created as a response out to how Rolling Ruins should have been like for a much more enjoyable experience. And at first glance, you guys might think that there is not much aesthetics to really support this map, But how I feel ABC creates maps is that there is that certain difference when maps are being created. And much more so as things are being created. Alright, I will be moving on to my top 10 in a very short moment. And for those of you who have stick through until this point, listening to whatever I have to say, I do really deeply appreciate it. Because currently at this point, I know that the video is not of its best quality because I'm not a professional not map, but video creator at any point, and so moving on to my number 10, from what I do understand that is that this creator much more focuses on survival maps much more than race maps for me to showcase. But at number 10, we do actually have the creator Mikmin. And for one thing I want to point out is that the maps that I really strongly recommend all of you to actually y'all to really take a look at is TikTok Clock, and even another map that's much more recent that I do not remember the name of. All these maps are really complete masterpieces because they are not just focused on player versus player survival, but much more so on player versus the map compared to how most other survival maps are when they look at such thing, and it's player versus player. And every single time when you see such maps, it is more towards just so I do want to also quickly move on to the number 9 of this list. And personally, I know this the upcoming number 9 will not be too much favored by most people, as I do recognize the effort that map makers like this particular one and some others do put into their maps. But again, at this point, I must emphasize that the rankings of mine are purely subjective based on my opinions only. Alright, so officially moving on to my number 9, we actually have Washbank on my list. I do know the efforts that creators like Washbank has already done for like map creating. I would say that him along with another one on my list that is in my top 5. I will not mention who it is just yet, and I will not mention where in my top 5 is this particular person, has already done a collaboration map before. For those of you who are a little bit more active on social media, y'all would have been aware of this particular map that they have done. And when common minds think alike, they can create such maps that are worthy of players to play through. So eventually I will move on to showing some other maps that others have done as well, but as of this current moment, I will just leave it saying that Washbank is perhaps much more of they are much more of the pioneers of map creating, and they pave the way for creators that are above here to keep making maps that are much more different and constantly different. We are going to move on to number 8, and in number 8 we actually have the creator Diet Angel, and some of you might have seen this map in Explore, and the map that I am actually referring to is called Candy Kingdom, if I did not mess the name of the map up. But regardless, the aesthetics and gameplay of the map, when you combine them together, it is very much more enjoyable. And when you look at certain maps like these, it really proves to you how much effort creators put into creating maps, because such elements of aesthetics would require perhaps days of creating. For some, yes, I do understand that they are able to create maps like within a few specific short hours and whatever else. Alright, so moving on to number 7 in my map creator list, we do actually have the creator of the map block off, and I will be showing you y'all how what this map is really about and why the creator of this map is in my spot as I actually put it in. So moving on to number 7, we do have the map, as I mentioned, block off, and the creator of this map is actually GameDog. Some of you have already seen maps from GameDog from other different sources, like perhaps explore or from other Fall Guys creators streams. And the main deciding factor of why I made GameDog part of this list is because of how of all the different maps when I'm looking through different aspects of how certain things are, is how overall how the individual elements are placed that provides a challenge for players. And even though you may think that this map isn't that much decorative or anything, but when you think excuse me, some of the maps that GameDong have created, they are much more aesthetic focused with the little bean of his at the very end of the map. And when you look at all the different gameplay mechanics, it is rather simple for players to adapt as well. So to really mention much more about GameDog is that he makes maps that are much more themed around his being in-game and some other things. However, I would say that a little bit much more customization can be actually done, but whatever the amount of aesthetics that's already been shown is worthy enough for me to think that they take a much more time to create that particular aesthetics. Of course, there are other maps that I would recommend all of you to try out. I would be inserting some of them as one of my pinned comments, so not to worry about that much. So now we shall move on to number 6. And on number 6, we actually have Adster as my number 6. I'm certain some of you have already seen maps like Broken Bridge, Carousel Sorcery from Adster, and because these maps are much more survival based, I am unable to showcase the map on my own accord. But are there maps from Adster that is definitely interesting? There are, and even a much more recent map like Rubik's Corruption, it's very much more based on player versus map more than player versus player, which is kind of what Broken Bridge is based upon. And then you have Carousel Sorcery, which is a even mix of both. So now I will be moving on to number 5 in this map making list, and in number 5 we will actually have the creator of this particular map. Alright, so moving on to the map that I have in number 5, it is More Art Guys, and the creator of it is Crazy Knickknack. And for some of you who are much more aware of what maps that Knickknack has already created, there are maps that are much more of the aesthetic qualities. I would say that the combination of the aesthetics for like the erasers, the spray cans, and in the sequel, which is this particular map, the sharpeners, making use of the rotation controller function in the game to create this particular drawing over here. All these paintballs. And also the final part, which is the sharpener in motion. So I would say that the maps that Knickknack creates are really much more really so on the aesthetic side. The gameplay are also much more of the sceneable part as well. And now I will move on to number 4. And number 4 in this ranking series, I do have the map creator Cybercriminal. There is a map that I want to showcase, but unfortunately I do not remember the code for it. Therefore, I will just quickly mention out that the map name is called A Fun Weekend, which showcases the different things that people can do on a weekend as they decide to wind down and relax and much of other things. The map itself is very aesthetic, even though the surroundings is just your normal plain original skybox, as it's much more of an original creative thing when skyboxes weren't really much of a thing in creative just yet. But the elements that are placed inside there allow for players to understand what had to be done. And now we shall just quickly move on to number 3 in this map making setup. And I think from here, except for the first placed winner in my list, I will not be showcasing the map itself, but I will be mentioning what maps are worth checking out, as well as leaving the codes in the pinned comment as soon as possible. In number 3 in my map makers, I do have we do actually have Barrel Goblin. Barrel Goblin has already been creating much more of creative maps and some other parts and maps. For example, like Kuromi's Candy Shop. You even have maps like Squishy Stumble Naturals. Some of the oh wait, hang on a second. I might have do make some mistakes on the maps that are to be recommended. But regardless, do keep a lookout on my pinned comment because the comment will contain the maps that I do want to recommend. Because I am reading through now then we shall move on to number 2 of this map creator list, and as I actually did particularly mention that number 2 has did a collab with number 9 in my list, and number 2 goes to top 2 forever, who have actually made, whether you consider modded maps which is through CEP or just regular vanilla budget maps, but regardless of what all this is, all the maps that top 2 creates are of an exceptional quality. So some of the maps that I would probably recommend y'all to really try out, and this is a survival map, and a lot of players do enjoy playing this map, and the map name is called Arc Turbine. Therefore, this is something that really has a balanced combination of player versus map and player versus player, because the player versus map comes from the disappearing tiles that are present in the map, and then the player versus player element comes in the fact that how you are going to avoid griefing players. And now it is actually time to reveal the number 1 spot in my list. Just as a heads up, for this number 1, I will not be speaking until I finish this map, so please enjoy how this map looks overall, regardless of how much the newer physics have perhaps say cheat allowed for more shortcuts in the map, I would say, but the map has to be highlighted, and I would say eventually put it into knockout. Okay, this is after a review of what I've done for my ranking when I was looking through this top 20, and I have to give this top number 1 position to Reina, as she creates maps that are simply beyond amazing. And it is not just this map that I want to highlight, there are other maps as well. I will try and highlight all the maps into the list as well in my pinned comment, so check out all the maps. And I have recommended maps from Reina to other Fall Guys streamers as well, and they have all agreed that Reina is an astounding map creator, and regardless of what it has to be said about the often creation of the map, so now just really keep a track. Check out the maps that Reina creates, and actually even any of the top 20. And really just give these fellas a look, and I hope to hear what you guys have to say. Again, if you have stuck to the end of this video, I have to thank you, because I know this video are much more of a poorer quality, because I did not create any specific animations to transit from each of the ranking positions. And have a good one. Thank you.